Hello, this is Tony Blazer, back with another video for the Motocross Vault. What this one's going to cover is the fourth installment of my Blaze Reviews series, where I've gone back and looked at all the motorcycles I've personally owned over the years. This fourth installment is going to cover all the off-road machines. Now, that covers both enduro bikes, dual sports, pretty much anything, play bikes, stuff that wasn't really strictly a race machine. I've had a lot of stuff. I've had, like I said, in past videos, close to 50 at last count. If you count ATVs, street bikes, off-road, motocross, everything. I've owned every brand pretty much, at least the big five. I don't think I've ever had a Husqvarna. I've had all the big five: KTM, Honda, Kawasaki, Suzuki. I even had a Harley dirt bike once upon a time. That was kind of like the first, maybe the second off-roader I guess I had. That thing was a real pile of junk, but be that as it may, I've had a little bit of everything. I've had a chance to basically see what I like and don't like about them, and this is going to be just my opinion. It has nothing to do with what the magazines thought of the individual machines or what other people think. It's just my personal recollections, the experience I had about the motorcycles. Some of them I liked, some of them I didn't, some of them I hated with a passion. I'll give you an idea of what I thought on each one. So if you want to check out the others, like I said, there's three others. My first one covered the 125s. My second one covers the 250s, and the third one I just posted recently covers the open class bikes. 2 strokes, 4 strokes are all kind of just divided by cc. So if you like this sort of thing, make sure you check out the channel. Those videos are on there. Lots of other classic motocross stuff is on there as well. I have a lot of other motocross videos, motorcycle related stuff. If you can share it on social media, I'd certainly appreciate it. Give it a thumbs up and a like. It would be greatly helpful to the channel. So in any case, here is the off-road motorcycles I've had over the years. My first sort of off-roader, the 1972 Honda CB350. All right, my first off-road bike technically wasn't an off-roader, but it was the first bike I used for off-road use. It was a 1973 CB350 Honda. Now, that's a twin-cylinder street bike. It was already, I don't know, 13 years old or something at this point. Maybe a little older. I don't remember, 84, 85, somewhere in that range. I ended up having this bike, and it was actually given to me by a friend of my parents. Now, I was too young. I didn't have my street license. Couldn't ride it on the street yet. I wasn't old enough. Like I said, I was maybe 13 when I had this bike. And I just rode it up and down my driveway all day long. My driveway's pretty long. It's probably a half-mile long to the road, and then there's another portion of it that went down to what would eventually be my neighbor's house, but at this point it was just like a logging road. And I used to ride up and down this damn road on that thing constantly. And I remember that was I had the first motocross race I ever saw was Carlsbad on the Wide World of Sports. And I had never seen anybody ride motocross. I didn't know what motocross was. Some kid in my neighborhood when I was like 7 or 8 had a YZ125, but it was off my radar. I didn't follow any of that stuff. And I saw those dudes riding a Carlsbad. I was like, oh my God, it blew my mind. I'd never seen anything like it. So I jump on my CB350 and go tearing up the logging road. Of course, it's got street tires on it. Immediately lay it over, ended up folding the turn signal back into the tank, which was metal, and of course it dented it all to hell. So I realized at that point, maybe not the hot setup for off-road use, but I rode the hell out of that bike for, I don't know, 6 or 8 months, and pretty much enjoyed the hell out of it while it lasted until I beat it to death. Off-roader number 2, the 1973 Honda CT90 Trail. My second off-road bike was an equally ancient off-road machine. This one was a little bit more suitable for off-road use. It was a 1973 Honda CT90, also known as the Trail 90. This was the step-through bike. It had a pretty cool like dual-range transmission, so you could put it in low and have a granny gear. This is one of these, I think probably one of the most popular motorcycles Honda ever built. It's kind of like the Dreams and all these other ones that you see running all over Thailand and places. Really versatile machine. I can just see, somebody had a little rack on the back for delivering stuff. They probably have bikes just like this running around Tokyo to this day. It wasn't much of an off-roader. Obviously, very limited suspension. Not much to it. This bike actually, my buddies and I found at a pile of trash not far from our house. It didn't run. We ended up dragging it back to my house. We got it running. Believe it or not, it ran for like, I don't know, we probably had it 7 or 8 months maybe. It eventually it died because my brother-in-law tried to jump it over like a little the neighbor was building a house, and there was a little, everybody sees a basement, and they're like, oh, we're going to jump it. So he takes it out there, jumps it, ripped all the electricals out of the inside of it. Again, it's got 2 inches of travel, and they're really just street bike shocks. It was a fun little bike while it lasted, though. It kind of was the first motorcycle I could even really consider taking off-road. Like I said, that CB350 was a street bike. I ended up crashing it a couple times on gravel roads, laid it down, gave my leg I took all the meat off my leg like an idiot, riding. I might have been riding in shorts like a moron. But anyway, riding that CB around like I thought I was Rick Johnson or something. That was a bad idea. So that Trail 90 was a cool little bike. Fun machine, certainly way more capable off-road. If you put it in low range, it kind of chug up any little hill and stuff. So that was kind of the first, what I would consider real kind of off-road dirt bike I had. Off-roader number 3 is the, I'm not sure what year, Harley Davidson 175. After the CT90 expired, one of my parents' friends, who was actually a mechanic at a gas station, passed along to me another kind of reclamation project. It was an old Harley Davidson, one of the old AMF Harleys, a two-stroke Harleys from the 70s. Honest to God, I don't know what year this thing was. I really don't know much about it. I barely remember the bike. It basically looks like one of these, you know, kind of street-looking ones here. I remember it was two-stroke. I remember it was a 175. I do remember that, you know, my buddy Jamie Connor rode it and thought it was a four-stroke because it sounded so quiet. It's like, you know, it was a neat motorcycle for what it was. It was mostly a street bike. It was very similar to that, you know, the CT90, and it wasn't really made for any serious off-road use. I didn't have very long, though. Eventually, maybe we had it a month or two after we got it running, and we rode it around a little bit, but then we had an electrical problem, and the problem was, this is, I don't know, 84, 85, maybe, I don't know. And AMF was no longer running Harley Davidson at this point. That had been sold back to Harley. So those Italian built bikes, of course, there's no internet back then too. I couldn't find parts for it. I was like, I didn't know where to look. You know, I'm maybe, I don't know, 8th grade or 5th freshman in high school or something. And I didn't have any clue where to get parts for this damn thing. So when the electricals went, the Harley was essentially scrap. So it went right back to the junkyard where we had got it from. Off-roader number 4 is the 1980 Honda XR200. Probably my first, you know, quote-unquote real off-roader was a 1980 XR200. Now, this bike was, I don't know, 4 or 5 years old when I got it, somewhere around there. At this point, though, I had actually transitioned and had a motocross bike. I got my 78 CR250, and I had that. And I got this XR. It's kind of a little more off-roady, kind of a play bike to play with. This was a fun bike. This was the first, like I said, real off-road machine I had. That was, the CR was awesome, way, way, way more powerful, but very high-strung. Wasn't really good for playing around in the trails. So at the time, we had built some network of trails. We were having a good time riding back there in the trails and stuff. So this was really fun for that. The 200 was like a little billy goat. It would go up any little hill and stuff. Unfortunately, the bike was pretty tired by the time I got it. Like I said, I bought it cheap, a few $100 or something. It wasn't really expensive. And back in the old days, they had this Cush drive, which was like, because the bike, I guess, probably shared the same wheel with the XL, the off-road version. It had like rubber grommets in the wheel. And what had happened was, over time, those rubber grommets had kind of worn out, and there was a little bit of a cock there. So I had to be careful. Sometimes under a hard landing, it would cock it and throw the chain off, which was not ideal. Eventually, the thing started shifting itself. That was another thing it did. This just tells you what an asinine idiot I was. I had no idea how dangerous this was. I was motocrossing the thing around our little track we built in Point of Rocks. We were taking it around. I was beating the crap out of that XR. I ended up breaking the frame like 3 times, having to keep getting it welded. And towards the end of its life, it started downshifting. Like on hard, you'd land and wrap the throttle, and it would downshift itself. So clearly some shift dogs were getting messed up inside the transmission, which leads you to think, you know, to 4-stroke, that means all those little pieces of metal are swirling around in there. So eventually it finally locked up. You know, they say XRs are indestructible. I'm living proof they're not indestructible. If you're like a 15-year-old moron, doesn't know any better, you can ride them into the ground. And this poor XR, it got literally ridden to death. I loved it while it worked, though. It was super fun. I had a good time with it. I'm just lucky it didn't lock up in the air and kill me or anything. So thank you for that, XR. My next off-roader is the 1984 Yamaha IT200. The next off-roader I picked up was a 1984 Yamaha IT200. Now, this bike didn't run when I got it. It was at a friend of a friend's, had it in their barn. It was like, what's funny is it's like maybe 2 years old, 3 years old tops. This is probably 86, somewhere in that range. But the bike already didn't run. Some of that could be probably attributed to redneck abuse, which certainly accelerates the lifespan of any motorcycle. I think in general, bikes just didn't last as long back then too. Nowadays, a bike that's 5, 6 years old, nobody blinks an eye at it really, pretty much. But in those days, you know, a bike was a couple years old, it was pretty tired. So this thing was pretty worn out when I got it. I ended up, you know, it took me a while. I think it didn't run for at least a couple months. I had to save up mowing lawns and stuff to get the money to fix it. Put a set of piston rings in it, and once I got it going, it ran for maybe another 2 months, and then the crank went. So clearly, it was already shot when I got it. I didn't know what I was looking for when I had it apart. Didn't know. I was riding it, and the thing just went bang bang! And I took it apart and just the roller bearings all around inside there, rattling around. So it was toast. I didn't have the money to do a complete rebuild, so I ended up selling it. So I didn't actually have this bike very long. I wish I had it now. It's a cool bike. I'd love to pick up an IT200, kind of a really neat machine. I didn't have it long enough to really enjoy it, though, so RIP IT200. My next off-road machine is the 1987 Honda Fatcat. Around the time I had the IT200, one of my buddies there in Point Rocks, Maryland, Brian Ross, picked up a Yamaha BW200, which was, if you're not familiar with it, it was a two-wheel motorcycle with ATV tires. Kind of a weird thing. Rokon had done something, you know, like that sort of in the 70s, although theirs were two-wheel drive and made for going up to the middle of nowhere. This was just a straight-up play bike. The BW was pretty wild. It had like twin shocks and this jack shaft going to the side to clear the tire. It was, you know, kind of a cobby looking machine, but it was pretty fun. Like I said, we were into riding trails around Point Rocks, and for that kind of stuff, the BW was good. You could go through water and stuff like that. So I was like, you know what, it'd be fun to get one of these. And then Honda came out with their own version called the Fatcat. And I said, you know, I'll get one of these just so I can ride with Brian. And I thought, okay, if the Yamaha is fun but cobby, the Honda seems so much cooler. I mean, I think it still looks cool now. The bike is really, you know, kind of an icon of its era. It had electric start, auto clutch. Well, I didn't really like that part of it, but it looked a lot more sleek. It didn't have all the weird jack shaft thing going on. Monoshock. On paper, it looked like a modern CR versus like a 70s bike, the Yamaha. But it turns out the performance was completely flipped. I ended up buying it. It was the first brand new bike I ever owned. I still have the contract over here in my closet where my mom co-signed for me here at Hall's Honda in Leesburg. And I got this thing home, and from the first day we went riding on, I was like, this was a terrible mistake. I hated this motorcycle. Number one, it was slow. It had a version of the 200X motor, but the 200X ATC had a higher performance cam in it, had a manual clutch. You know, it was really detuned. I mean, you could barely get the thing to pull a wheelie, and the fact that there was no clutch certainly didn't help that. It wasn't like the Yamaha was a powerhouse either. It was pretty slow to begin with. It's more or less, I think, honest to God, it felt way slower than that XR200. It weighed a ton. It handled terribly. The drum brakes it's funny. You think this thing would be great for going through like the water and sand and stuff. And you know, my parents' place borders a creek, and we would ride down there all the time. I took it down there in the water. As soon as you got the thing in the water, the tire was a good bit. It was probably 30% narrower than what was on the Yamaha, and it would dig down. It had a pair of Atsus, I think, and it would dig down into the sand and get stuck. And it didn't have the power to pull itself out. Once they got wet, the brakes went completely away. The shock was atrocious. I hit a bump one time, and it did like one of these massive flying W deals, jacked me way up in the air. I remember one time I landed off a jump, and when I landed, it bottomed so hard I hit my head on the crossbar, and it blew my goggles off. I mean, this thing was terrible. I hated this motorcycle. I think I paid $1,500 for it brand new, maybe some $1,400, and I had it like 6-8 months. I sold it for $700 after that. I literally paid double what I sold it for 6 months later. Of course, now they're worth a lot of money. I wish I should have kept it. I probably would have quadrupled my money now, but this was a terrible motorcycle. I hated it. If you have them now, God bless you. I hope you enjoy it, but it wasn't for me. My next off-roader is the 2000 Suzuki DRZ 400S Dual Sport. For the next 16, 15 years or so, I didn't have any off-road bikes. Pretty much through the 90s, I stuck just with motocross bikes. I had a ton of motocross bikes. I was turning them all the time, and I did a lot of riding off-road. But we just rode on our motocross bikes. We didn't buy, you know, off-road machines specifically. And then in the early 2000s, I started getting the kind of wild hair to get some kind of a dual sport bike to ride, you know, off-road, on-road. By then, I'd moved to Leesburg, and there were some trails out near what's now a Costco. Unfortunately, it's like a park full of stores now. But back then, there were really neat little trails you could ride on and stuff. So I thought it'd be fun, instead of loading up my bike, to be able to hop on, get on a dual sport, and go for a ride. So I picked up in 2000 DRZ 400S, which was maybe the second year of it. It was a nice bike. It was low mileage. It wasn't new, but it was darn near new, maybe 6 months old at this point. It was right around 2000, 2001 I had it. And this first generation, though, the motor was really good. I ended up having a couple of quads with this engine in it later. It was a great engine. It was really versatile, smooth, very much like a little higher performance version of an XR. The thing I didn't like about this one, though, the first generation of this S model did not have the same suspension the regular dirt version did. Later ones got the upgraded suspension. If you got like, I don't know, maybe an 04, 05, they had the same suspension between the two. Much more performance. His very first S model, the 99, 2000, I'm not sure, for the first couple years had like complete turd foof suspension. So if you tried to actually ride it at the pace the motorcycle was capable of, it would put you on your head if you're not careful. The forks were super soft, shocks super soft. I remember they tried to jump a log one time and the thing just like rebounded and shot me in the air. It was a little dicey. The bike itself, I didn't really love it. It was not great off-road, which is always the problem with dual sport. It wasn't great off-road. It wasn't particularly comfortable on-road. Something like an XRL 650, what I get later, was a much better on-road bike. It was kind of this in-between. I had it a few months, rode some trails on it. It was okay. I wasn't really happy with it, so I didn't keep it very long. But I don't think it was the bike's problem. If you got the suspension sorted, it's a good bike. I think they still even make it. So they're, like I said, the motor was great. The suspension was really the only downside. Dual sport number 2 was the 1986 Honda XL 600R. A year or two after I got rid of the DRZ, I came across a motorcycle I'd always wanted one of, like this local cycle trader or something. It was fairly local to us. It was a 1986 XL 600R. Now, this is a bike I always thought was really cool. When I was younger, I always thought it'd be cool to have an XL. I'd never ridden one or anything, and I like this red, white, and blue one. It has a red engine, and it was just a neat, kind of iconic mid-'80s Honda. Really, really cool motorcycle at the time. I ended up picking it up. This thing was in pretty good shape, actually. I should say it was in really good shape, considering it's probably 15 years old at this point. It's probably 2002 or 3. And I think I paid like $1,500 for it or something. It was a really fun bike for riding wheelies around town. I thought it actually was a better street bike than the DRZ, and that the seat was very big and cushy and soft. It wasn't nearly as good off-road, though. The motor was good, actually. That XL had pretty good power. But holy, I took it actually on some of the trails at my parents' place. There's some really steep downhills, and that spindly little disc brake, which is about this big around, and the mediocre tires, it was dicey. I mean, a couple times this thing probably weighed 350 pounds. It got going down a hill, and I was like, I am not stopping, because if you tried to jump on the brakes, they weren't great to begin with. The suspension was real soft. It would like almost bottom out the forks just in fork dive from the braking, and it was a little bit of a handful. If you took it a slow pace, fire roads, like I took it on some gravel roads out where my parents live and stuff, it was awesome for that. You could just like full lock, power slide it, have a good time. If you took it in some tight trails, though, it was just too heavy, and the suspension was very soft. It was really, as long as you kept it in its element, it was a really fun bike, cool bike. And like I said, it was one I always wanted. I love the looks of it still. So I had that one for probably a year, got bored with it, and like every other one, I ditched it. My next off-road machine is the 2001 Kawasaki KTX 200. Around 2004, I had, as I said, mostly had motocross bikes for riding in the woods and stuff, and I had just bought my CRF 450R, and I decided, you know what, it was a little bit of a manhandling machine, those big 450s in the woods, so I thought it might be fun to have a little two-stroke again. So I ended up picking up a 2001 KTX 200. I'd always liked the KTXs from afar. I never owned one. A friend of mine had one when we were kids, a little air-cooled one, but I never owned them. I always thought they were neat bikes, though. I love two-strokes. Two-strokes, I think, are really awesome in the woods, and the KTX was a neat bike, and the bike they were dirt cheap back then, at least. They're probably expensive now because they never should stop making them. But anyway, this 01 was really the same from, I think, 96 was the first year up until they stopped making them. They're basically the same motorcycle. It really was a fun bike. No hit to speak of. It's just like linear, smooth power. Thing I liked about it was it's essentially like a 125. You can just pin it everywhere. Just scream the hell out of it, and it just goes and goes. It's fun. There's no sudden rush of power or anything. It's not going to outpower anybody in a drag race, but in the woods, it's awesome fun. The bike handles really well. Ergonomics are comfortable. Suspension's a little soft. I mean, if you're like me, I was heavy to begin with, and then with that stock suspension, if I take it around my motocross track, it was not good. Like I said, my buddy actually had, like I said, one of the earlier ones, and I remember I was taking around our motocross track, and I actually bottomed it out hard enough I broke one of the springs in the damn thing. He was not happy about that, but yeah, you had to be careful with that. It was not made for that kind of stuff, but as long as you kept the pace down, it was very nimble, great turning. I never took anywhere high speed or anything. We were riding in the woods, but in the woods, it was an awesome bike. I actually love this little motorcycle. I liked it so much that after having it about a year, I decided I wanted to upgrade and get the same thing, kind of just a little bit newer. My next off-road machine, the 2005 KTM 200 EXC. of all the bikes I've owned, and I've owned a lot, that '05 KTM may be one of the coolest. That thing had the most amazing motor. People who say two strokes can't be torquey or smooth or easy to ride, they have never ridden a KTM 200 EXC. That thing was a billy goat. I couldn't believe, it was almost like a trials bike at low speed. In first gear, you could climb up a sheer wall. It was amazing. And then you clutch it and it comes on the pipe like a 125. Just maybe one of the best two-stroke motors ever built. Just phenomenal. I love that bike. The suspension was decent for what I was using. I wasn't taking it on a motocross track. I did take it on a motocross track one time. That was a mistake. It was a little sketchy. The handling was very tuned towards turning, so at high speed it got a little bit of a head shake, and the suspension was not great for that either. We took it out to Tomahawk one time, and we rode it around there, and it wasn't great at that. But keep it in its element, it was a phenomenal motorcycle. The thing was super quiet, just a great bike, phenomenal brakes. This KTM was an awesome motorcycle. Probably the best all-around, just like off-road machine I ever owned. I always wanted one of the 200 motocross versions. I never could understand why they stopped making them. I thought it was a great kind of in-between bike. Somebody like me who likes a 125 but is really too heavy for it, kind of like the 150, I guess, but the 200 would have been even more so. I made it a few years and just killed it for some reason. But this is a great bike. If you haven't ever had one, if you can get one, I highly recommend this. Is a great motorcycle. My next off-road machine, the 2001 Honda XR650L. Around 2005 or so, Lord knows why, but I got the bug to get another dual sport. Like I said, I'm very fickle. I'm always changing my mind about things. So I found over in Winchester, Virginia, which is about 45 minutes from me, a guy had a 2001 Honda XR650L, which is basically the far more updated version of that old XL600 I had. Now, this was a cool motorcycle, phenomenal at pulling wheelies, phenomenal road bike, really good on the road. Maybe not quite as roadworthy as like a KLR 650 or something, but compared to like my DRZ 400 or some of the other dual sports I've had, really, really good, comfortable bike. Big, cushy seat. My only problem is I'm only 5'8", and this thing is a skyscraper. I mean, it's probably like that because going across the desert, you need all that suspension and stuff. And really, this is a great dirt bike that's street legal. But it's here in the East Coast, man, I took it on a couple of tight trails in some of the places I normally ride, and it was a handful. Number one, if I stopped it on the side of a hill, I couldn't touch the ground. I dropped the thing a couple times because I could barely get my legs swung over the damn thing with that little toolkit in the back. It is, like I said, really a tall motorcycle. So if you're Tom Webb and you're 6'2" or something, probably not a problem. If you're short like me, I had to kind of cock my ass off, side saddle at stoplights and stuff. The fact that it was so dang tall really kind of soured me on a little bit. It made it, like I said, difficult. I had to be careful where I stopped it on the trail and make sure I don't end up tipping over. And Lord knows if you drop it, it's a hell of a thing to get it back going again and get it up. I mean, electric start wise, but it's heavy. Great wheelie machine, smooth power. I mean, it really is the same bike that Scott Summers won all those GNCC titles on, which blows my mind. If you ride the thing, how the hell he went so fast on such a big, heavy motorcycle is beyond my understanding. But good dual sport. Like I said, if you're looking for a bike that does a little bit of everything and you don't need it for tight trails, it's a phenomenal choice for that. It's a good dirt bike in its element, but if you're buying it for Eastern trails, you're better off with something much smaller. My next off-road machine, the 2008 KTM 250XC. In the mid-2000s, I went through a little bit of a KTM phase. I had that 05 EXC 200. I ended up getting a 2005 525SX and a 2008 125SX. I liked all those bikes, cool machines. The 125, though, when I got back on it, I had not had a 125 for 8 years at this point since my 99 CR, and I just couldn't come to grips with riding it again. It was plenty fast, but the power band felt like this big after riding at the time I had a CRF 450, I think, and this was just so off the scale different. I couldn't get used to it. It's like I never could understand those guys that could ride 2 and 3 classes and ride a 500 and then jump on a 125, and I could never jump back and forth that quickly. I didn't feel that comfortable on the KTM, so I ended up selling it and getting something I thought I'd be a little happier with, which was a 2008 KTM 250XC. Now at this point, I'd gotten rid of the 200, and I wanted something again for woods, but maybe a little something more potent. And this '08 fit the bill. It was a perfect kind of in-between motorcycle, because again, I'd always use my bikes like half and half, like off-road half and motocross half. And this was a great kind of in-between machine. Little things I love, like it had a kickstand that was great for on the trail. The suspension felt good for me. It was I could jump any jumps on the track with it. It wasn't a problem. I think the suspension pretty much is the same settings as the motocross version. Maybe the spring weight was a little bit less, but it felt fine to me. I took it on motocross track. I had no problem. The brakes worked phenomenally. I mean, those things were like works bike strong. The motor was soft compared to some bikes. Like I had an 05 250 YZ and the 06 KX and stuff. It was definitely softer. The XC, I guess, probably has a bit more flywheel weight and stuff. It didn't hit nearly as hard as that, and you could really lug it down a lot more. So it was much smoother. You could kind of ride the whole track without just wringing it out. Perfect for the woods. If you're going to straight up motocross it, I think you'd probably want to adjust the power valve. It came with a couple different springs and maybe put a different pipe on it. But for what I was doing, it was a great kind of in-between bike. I never had a problem with the no-link suspension. For what I was doing, it worked fine. I wasn't hitting supercross whoops or anything on it. Great handling bike, great motorcycle. One I had a lot of fun with. I really enjoyed this bike. And like I said, people who picked on those no-link KTMs, I think mostly those were guys who were racing supercross. Most real people who weren't doing that with it were probably pretty happy with the bike, as was I. My last off-road machine, the 2014 Honda CRF 250L. All right, we've come to the end and the last of my off-road machines, at least for now. The last one I picked up in 2014. Once again, I got the bug to get a dual sport bike. At this point, I was working up in New Jersey, going up there through the week and then coming home on the weekends. Kind of a strange thing I did for like 5 years there. And I thought I'd like to keep a bike up there for riding around town when I was in Jersey through the week. So I looked at a couple different things. I was comparing basically the Yamaha WR 250 and the CRF 250. Unfortunately, you usually can't test ride these bikes. That's what kind of sucks. You know, you're not sure which one you like. From reading the tests, the Yamaha seemed like a much more off-road worthy bike. And in hindsight, I probably would have been happier with it. Really, I would have been happiest probably if I just taken a dirt bike and put a Baja kit on it. But be that as it may, I ended up going with the Honda because it was significantly less expensive. It was like $1,000 less, I think, back in 2014. And the seat height was much lower. Again, Yamaha is very tall. That's why I kind of went with the KTM a couple years ago instead of getting my a YZ250F. I thought the ass ends were real high. It was kind of a pain to get it off, and I didn't want to deal with that anymore. So the Honda sat lower. It was lower priced. It seemed spec-wise to be similar, so how could you go wrong? Well, this is a motorcycle that I didn't really love. At the time, I don't think I had any dirt bike. This is kind of like a couple year period where I got rid of my dirt bikes and I maybe went a year and a half or so without one. And I got this CRF in that interim there. And if I'd had a dirt bike to ride, like when I wanted to go off-road, I probably would have been happier. But when I was trying to get one little bike to play with and do it all, and it wasn't good at that. It was fine for riding around town. If I took it up, ended up leaving it up in Jersey and rode it around town there. I rode it to work. It was fine for that. But I wanted to take it off-road a couple times. My buddy Nash had some trails up there and stuff, and it wasn't any good at that. It was, at least for me. You know, again, growing up riding almost dirt bikes for the most part, like motocross style bikes in the woods, you really had to lower your expectations on how you wanted the performance to be. The suspension was incredibly soft. There's no adjustment. It had inverted forks, and it looked like the bike looked pretty modern. You look at it, perimeter frame, I think, but it was steel, and it felt like it weighed 400 pounds. The bike was incredibly slow stock. I ended up getting a power commander, opening the exhaust, and opening the intake, and that made a huge difference. The bike was way better. Sounded better, much more performance. I was actually okay with the power there once I did that. Stock, though, I mean, you couldn't get it to pull a wheelie in first gear. It was so slow. Once I opened it up and piped it up, got a little bit more performance. That part was okay, but it still felt incredibly heavy. The handling was a little bit ponderous. I just wasn't real happy with it. I had it probably a year and a half, maybe, but after I rode it off-road maybe twice or three times when I first got it, and after that I said, screw this, and I just used it as a little commuter bike. It was fine for that. As a dirt bike, I didn't enjoy it, but as a little commuter street bike, it was fine. So there you have it. That's my look back at the many off-road machines I've had. Had quite an allotment of them, quite an assortment. If you like this sort of thing, make sure you check out the other ones I've done. Like I said, the first video covers my 125s, the second one, the 250s, and then the third one is the open bikes. I may also do the ATVs I've owned. I've owned a few of them, not nearly as many as the motorcycles I've had, but I've had a pretty good selection of them. Some of them pretty cool. So if you like this sort of thing, let me know. Subscribe to the channel as well. I'd certainly appreciate the support. Give it a like, share it on social media. That'd be greatly helpful as well. And like I said, if you have any ideas for other videos you'd like to see, I'd love to hear that as well. I'd definitely read the comments, try to respond. If you ask me a question on social media, my handle is @TonyBlazier. That's TonyBlazier. and I try to respond to all the comments and direct messages and stuff. So I certainly appreciate everybody's help and the support everybody gives me here at the channel. So until we meet again, keep the rubber side down. This is Tony Blazer. Peace.